Welcome back to the ePi-Fi channel on Brighteon.com. My name is Arthur Bobian. I have a PhD in science and have devoted more than 15 years now to the study of the planet Mars. I have made thousands of precise measurements, mostly from the Mars Orbiter Laser Altimeter maps of Mars. I have found that these maps are highly accurate and are the least likely to have been altered by NASA to hide all signs of the intelligent life that has existed on the planet for billions of years. I have recently discovered that a small mountain on Mars resembles a Shiva Linga. A Shiva Linga in Hinduism is a cylindrical or egg-shaped object which is most often made of stone. The Shiva Linga has many interpretations, but the one that I think is the correct one is that the Shiva Linga represents the primordial zygote or cosmic egg from which all creation has sprung. The linga is often placed vertically inside a bowl called the yoni, which represents the divine female power of creation. The yoni has a spout at one end to drain off water or other liquids which are poured onto the rounded end of the linga in ritual ceremony. The linga on Mars occurs as a small mountain with a height of 826 meters and a width of about 50 kilometers in the southeast to northwest direction. It is irregular in shape, and its southwest to northeast dimension is longer than its southeast to northwest dimension. It sits in a rectangular depression which might be considered to be a yoni. In ancient times, the depression was likely filled with water. This image simulates such a situation. Note that the rectangular depression would drain at the southwest corner, which acts as a spout. The linga on Mars is called Issedon Tholus by NASA. NASA considers it to be a small shield volcano and assigns coordinates to the mountain which distract from the coordinates of its caldera, the presence of which NASA does not even acknowledge. Also, NASA makes no mention of the rectangular depression which surrounds Issedon Tholus. The Shiva deity that the linga object is associated with is considered by many Hindus to be the deity of destruction. However, in Shaivism, one of the major sects of Hinduism, Shiva is also considered to be the creator of everything. It is therefore consistent with Shaivism that the linga would be a symbol of the creator aspect of Shiva. If Issedon Tholus on Mars was truly meant to depict a Shiva Linga, then it should somehow reflect the creator aspect of the Shiva deity. From my investigation of Mars, I discovered that the Martians used sacred geometry to proclaim their belief in a creator who brings everything into existence with vibrations that are structured according to the integers of harmonics and also according to basic irrational numbers. Hence, if a Shiva Linga truly represents the creator aspect of the divine, you might expect to find the basic irrational numbers to be encoded in some way in its design. The basic irrational numbers used on Mars are pi, which is the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, and has a value of about 3.14, phi, which is called the golden ratio, and has an approximate value of 1.618, e, which is Euler's number, the base of the natural log, and has a value of about 2.718. The square root of 2, which is the size of the diagonal of a square whose sides are 1 unit in length, and has a value of about 1.414. The square root of 3, which is the height of an equilateral triangle whose sides are 2 units in length, and has a value of about 1.732. And lastly, the square root of 5, which is the size of a diagonal of a double square, which creates a rectangle with a width of 1 unit and a length of 2 units. The square root of 5 has a value of about 2.236. To determine whether or not the Shiva Lingas, which are worshipped in Hindu and other temples, incorporate the irrational numbers in their dimensions, I have made measurements of several lingas from images available on the internet. I have discovered that the ratio of the height to the diameter of a linga is always in terms of fundamental irrational numbers found throughout nature. Here is a linga in which the ratio of height to diameter is equal to the golden ratio phi. The next image shows a linga in which the ratio is equal to the square root of 2. The next image is a linga whose height to diameter ratio is equal to 5 phi divided by pi. It is called the Ekamukha Linga, which means a single face. This linga is reported to be from the 5th or 6th century AD. Note the use of the integer 5 in the ratio formula. This could refer to the 5 elements of creation: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It could also refer to the 5 star points of the pentagram, which encodes the golden ratio in many ways. The next linga has a ratio of 4 phi divided by e. It is over 1,000 years old. Note the use of the integer 4 in the ratio. It probably refers to the 4 Shiva faces on the linga. Here is a linga with a ratio equal to the square root of 2 times phi. This linga shows the Shiva deity standing inside the linga. The next image shows a linga with a ratio equal to phi divided by the square root of 3. And the next image shows a linga with a ratio equal to the square root of 5 divided by the square root of 2. This linga is made out of copper. The final image that I will show you is a linga in Pakistan, which is reported to be at least 2,800 years old. It has a height to diameter ratio of the square root of 5 divided by the square root of 3. Here is a summary of height to diameter ratios for the 8 lingas. Note how often the golden ratio phi is used. It occurs in 5 out of the 8 formulae. The next most frequent irrational number in this sample is the square root of 2, which occurs in 3 of the 8 formulae. All 6 of the basic irrational numbers occur at least once in this set of lingas. Now let's look at Issedon Tholus, the Shiva Linga on Mars. Here it would not be possible to obtain a height to diameter ratio since the mountain is not cylindrical. Are there other ways in which this linga encodes the basic irrational numbers of creation? I have shown in a previous video entitled NASA Hides the Truth About Issedon Tholus on Mars that this mountain encodes the value of the golden ratio phi in several ways. First of all, the coordinates of the tip of an arrowhead located in the caldera of Issedon Tholus are 36 degrees north and 36 degrees west, when an ancient prime meridian, which I have discovered to exist on the Sharonov crater, is used as a reference longitude. In any isosceles triangle whose apex angle is equal to 36 degrees, the ratio of one of its equal sides to its base is equal to phi. In any isosceles triangle whose 2 base angles are equal to 36 degrees, the ratio of its base to one of its equal sides is also equal to phi. The pentagram contains 5 instances of both of these types of isosceles triangles. Hence, it is very reasonable to assume that the purpose of the arrow tip in what appears to be the Issedon caldera is to honor the value of phi as well as the pentagram. I have also discovered that the ancient Martians used radians as one of their systems to measure out coordinates. It turns out that 36 degrees is equal to pi over 5 radians. Hence, 36 degrees latitude and 36 degrees longitude honor the number pi as well as the number phi, and the number pi over 5 also relates to the number of star points in a pentagram. Next, let's look at the rectangular depression that Issedon Tholus sits in. When the edges of the depression are fit to a rectangular shape, it is found that an excellent fit is achieved when the rectangle has a bearing angle of 45 degrees from due north. Another property of this rectangle is that its length is equal to the golden mean phi times its width. Such a rectangle is called a golden rectangle. So the yoni aspect of the Shiva Linga on Mars also emphasizes the golden ratio phi. From the geometry of a golden rectangle, we know that this rectangle can be perfectly divided into a square and a smaller golden rectangle. If we do this for the Issedon Tholus golden rectangle, we find that the major part of the edifice of the mountain fits inside the square if the square is located in the eastern part of the rectangle rather than in the western part. Neither the center of the square, shown by the yellow cross, nor the center of the golden rectangle, shown by the white cross, fall on the caldera of the mountain. If we assume that the caldera represents the true peak of Issedon Tholus, then the mountain peak is asymmetrical with respect to both the square and the golden rectangle. In my previous video on Issedon Tholus, I showed that the latitude and longitude coordinate values of all the corners and centers of the square and rectangle make some reference to the golden ratio phi. However, to understand this, you have to have some knowledge of the coordinate systems and ancient prime meridians of Mars. This is best done by viewing that video. I will only give a brief summary here. I have discovered that the ancient Martian civilization used 8 prime meridians and 2 prime latitudes to create sacred geometry numbers for the coordinates of key structures on the planet. This picture shows the location of these prime meridians and prime latitudes. Each vertical line represents 2 prime meridians, which are only slightly more than 4 minutes of a degree apart, and hence cannot be resolved on this map. The equator forms 1 prime latitude, as is the case on planet Earth. The second prime latitude occurs at the latitude of Arsia Mons and is equal to 8.0895 degrees south. You will also need to know that the ancient Martians used several degree systems in addition to the 360-degree system that we use on Earth to measure out coordinate values. A second system which they used was the 320-degree system, which has a degree size of 1.125 of the degrees of the 360-degree system. I call these degrees big degrees and use a double degree sign to signify them. The Martians also had a 288-degree system, which used a degree size of 1.25 of the degrees of the 360-degree system. I call these degrees sacred degrees, and use a triple degree sign to signify them. The Martians even used radians to measure out coordinates. A radian is equal to the angle made when the outside end of a radius line travels along the circle circumference for a distance equal to 1 radius. Hence, 1 radian on Mars is the angle made when the distance covered along the equator of the planet is equal to the radius of Mars. Since 1 radian is equal to an impractical 57.2958 regular degrees, they used 1/50th or 1/100th of a radian to measure out coordinates. There is also evidence that the Martians used big radians and sacred radians. A big radian is equal to 1 radian multiplied by 1.125, and a sacred radian is equal to 1 radian multiplied by 1.25. The Martians used degrees and radians to measure out distances as well as coordinates. When measuring out distances, they used the planetocentric system, which treats the planet as a sphere rather than as an oblate spheroid. They also used latitude degrees, since these did not vary with latitude. Longitude degrees cover smaller distances with increasing latitude, since meridian lines converge at the poles of the planet. When we look at the actual dimensions of the square and rectangle which fit the depression which Issedon Tholus is sitting in, we find that the length of the diagonal of the square is equal to 1.25 regular latitude degrees, which is equal to 1 sacred latitude degree. We know from elementary geometry that the diagonal of a square is equal to the length of a side times the square root of 2. Hence, the length of the side of the Issedon square has to be equal to 1 over the square root of 2 sacred degrees, which gives us the width of the rectangle. Since the rectangle is a golden rectangle, then the length of the rectangle has to be equal to the golden mean phi times 1 over the square root of 2 sacred degrees, which gives us phi over the square root of 2 sacred degrees. So far, we have seen the use of the golden mean phi and the square root of 2 in the Shiva Linga complex on Mars. Now let's look at the coordinates of the corners of the square and rectangle. I will only discuss the ones relevant to this video. The others can be seen on my previous video on Issedon Tholus, which used only the values that reflected the golden mean phi. Sometimes a corner can have more than one sacred geometry formula for a coordinate, and I will present some of these now to illustrate the use of all of the basic irrational numbers in the golden rectangle and its eastern square component. First of all, let's look at the square. I found that the golden rectangle gave the best fit to the depression in the landscape surrounding Issedon Tholus when the latitude of the center of the square was set to capital Phi sacred radians north of the Arsia Mons prime latitude, and the longitude of the center of the square was set to 105 big degrees east of the Elysium Mons prime meridian. It should be noted that capital Phi is the inverse of the golden ratio phi and is equal to 0.6180. The longitude value of 105 big degrees is evenly divisible by 5, the number of star points in a pentagram. It is also divisible by 21, which is a Fibonacci number that can be used to give an estimate of phi. Now let's look at the coordinates of the west corner of the square. Since the square has a bearing angle of 45 degrees from due north, the west corner of the square has the same latitude as the center of the square. The longitude of the west corner is equal to 4 times the square root of 3 times the square root of 5 big degrees east of the Pavonis Mons prime meridian. The presence of the number 4 in the formula probably is a reference to the 4 equal sides of the square. With this formula, we also find the two basic irrational numbers of the square root of 3 and the square root of 5. Turning now to the golden rectangle, the latitude of the east corner is the same as that of the center of the square, since the square has a bearing angle of 45 degrees from due north, and the east corner of the rectangle is the same as the east corner of the square. The longitude of the rectangle is found to be 10e 1/50th big radians west of the Sharonov Tower prime meridian, where e is Euler's number, which is the base of the natural log. The latitude of the rectangle's south corner is 70 times capital Phi degrees north of the Arsia Mons prime latitude, and the longitude of this corner is 10 times the square root of 2 sacred degrees east of the Pavonis caldera prime meridian. So with the coordinates of these corners of the square and rectangle, we see the use of all of the basic irrational numbers except pi. However, pi is contained in the value of 36 degrees for both the latitude and longitude of the tip of the arrow in the caldera of Issedon Tholus, since 36 degrees is equal to pi over 5 radians, as mentioned earlier. As with the Shiva Lingas in temples on earth, the most frequently used irrational number is the golden mean phi. Remember that capital Phi is the inverse of the golden ratio phi. The square root of 2 is the second most frequent irrational number present. We now have good evidence to show that, like the Shiva Lingas which were worshipped in Hindu and other temples, the Linga on Mars incorporates the 6 basic irrational numbers of pi, phi, e, square root of 2, the square root of 3, and the square root of 5 in its design. This suggests that the Issedon Tholus complex is actually a Shiva Linga which honors the creator aspect of the Shiva deity. This divine creator brings everything into existence with vibrations that are structured according to the basic irrational numbers, in addition to the use of the integers of harmonics. Could it be that Hinduism is connected to the ancient Martian civilization? This is not so outrageous as it first seems. I have shown in a video entitled, Huge Discovery, Stonehenge Uses Sacred Geometry to Harmonize with the Cosmos, that the diameters of the concentric circles of Stonehenge were measured out in units of Martian meters. Researchers using DNA studies have determined that the ancestors of the people who built Stonehenge were farmers who came from the Aegean Sea area. This would link Stonehenge to ancient Greece. Perhaps the Martian meter came to Earth first to the ancient Greeks, who then brought it to the British Isles. It is not unreasonable, then, to consider that Hinduism may have been derived from the ancient Martian civilization rather than having been originated by humanity on planet Earth. In my recent book entitled Intelligent Mars 3, Om and the Architect, I have determined that the ancient Martians had an understanding of Om which was even more profound than that found in Hinduism. On Mars, Om was understood to be the sound that created the planet and their own body shape using vibrations that are structured according to the basic irrational numbers, in addition to the use of the integers of harmonics, just like I have found for the creator aspect of the deity, Shiva. Perhaps Mars is indeed our sister planet. Thank you for watching.